The Pacific, 1944. The ocean stretched endlessly, dark and restless beneath a low, overcast sky. Waves slapped against the steel hulls of American transports, their rhythm slow and heavy, like a warning. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay an island no one aboard truly knew, only that it was fortified, defended, and soaked with the resolve of men who had sworn never to surrender. On the deck of a landing ship, Private First Class Thomas Reed tightened the strap of his helmet with shaking hands. He was 19, thin, and already older than he had been a year ago. Around him, Marines sat silently, rifles resting across their knees, eyes fixed anywhere but the water. The smell of oil, sweat, and salt filled the air. Reed swallowed and leaned closer to the man beside him, a Marine with a heavy radio set strapped to his back. "You hear that?" Reed whispered. The other Marine listened, not to Reed, but to everything else. The wind, the engines, the distant thunder of naval guns. "Yeah," Corporal Ben Yazzie finally said. "Sounds like the world holding its breath." Below deck, the radio crackled to life. Static hissed, then cleared. Yazzie adjusted his headset and spoke calmly, his voice steady despite the chaos building around them. The words that left his mouth were not English. They were Navajo, ancient, precise, alive. To any outsider, they sounded like riddles. To the men waiting for instructions, they meant everything. Far out at sea, battleships unleashed another barrage. The sound rolled across the water like continuous thunder, shaking the landing craft. Every shell screamed overhead, tearing through air before smashing into the island's rocky spine. Fire rose in pillars of smoke and flame. Inside concrete bunkers carved deep into the island, Japanese soldiers braced themselves. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka stood rigid in the dim light, his uniform stained with dust and sweat. He had been awake for nearly 2 days. His men waited silently, fingers resting on triggers, listening to the bombardment pound the earth above them. "This is only the beginning," Tanaka said quietly. "When they come ashore, do not waste a single bullet." A radio operator nearby adjusted dials, intercepting American transmissions. English voices bled through the static: orders, coordinates, urgency. Then, suddenly, something else. The operator frowned. "Lieutenant, this transmission does not match any code we know." Tanaka stepped closer, listening. The language was unfamiliar, flowing, almost musical. Not English. Not any tongue he recognized. "Record it," Tanaka ordered. "We will break it later." But even as he spoke, artillery fire began shifting with terrifying accuracy. Machine gun nests were struck moments after firing. Mortar positions vanished under precise bombardment. Tanaka felt a chill that had nothing to do with fear of death. Above the island, American aircraft roared into the sky. Fighters streaked past one another in violent spirals, tracers flashing like sparks in a storm. Dive bombers screamed downward, releasing their payloads before pulling sharply away, engines howling. On the water, landing craft surged forward. 30 seconds. Someone shouted. The ramp slammed down. Chaos exploded. Machine gun fire tore into the first wave. Men fell into the surf before taking 3 steps. Water turned red. Explosions threw sand and bodies into the air. "Move! Get off the beach!" Reed screamed, though his voice was nearly lost beneath the noise. He ran, stumbled, dropped behind a burned-out tank. His heart hammered so hard it hurt. Nearby, Yazzie was already on his knees, radio pressed to his ear, voice calm despite the bullets snapping overhead. He spoke again in Navajo, faster this time. Within moments, the response came. American artillery shifted. Naval guns thundered. Bombs fell exactly where Japanese fire had been strongest seconds earlier. Reed stared in disbelief. How did they? Yazzie didn't answer. He was already transmitting again. The battle raged hour after hour. The beachhead grew by yards, paid for in blood. Japanese soldiers fought fiercely from hidden positions, emerging suddenly from tunnels, striking, disappearing again. As night fell, the fighting did not stop. Flares lit the sky. Gunfire echoed endlessly. Wounded men cried out in the darkness. Reed crouched in a shallow foxhole, hands slick with sweat and dirt. "You think they're scared too?" he asked quietly. Yazzie paused, listening to distant gunfire and the crackle of his radio. "Everyone's scared," he said. "Some of us just learn how to talk through it." Far underground, Tanaka studied maps by flickering lantern light. Every move the Americans made felt anticipated, countered before it fully formed. His men fought bravely, but something unseen guided the enemy. Night faded slowly, giving way to a gray, smoke-choked dawn. The island no longer looked like land. It looked like something wounded: cracked rock, scorched trees, blackened earth still steaming from shellfire. The air smelled of burned powder and salt, of death that had not yet cooled. Private First Class Thomas Reed woke in the foxhole to the sound of coughing and distant explosions. His hands trembled as he checked his rifle. Around him, Marines rose stiffly, eyes hollow, faces caked with dirt. Another day. Corporal Ben Yazzie was already working the radio. He hadn't slept. Dark circles framed his eyes, but his voice remained steady as he transmitted message after message, each one shaping the battle in ways no enemy could see. As American units pushed inland, resistance grew fiercer. Japanese soldiers emerged suddenly from tunnel entrances, striking at close range. Grenades echoed through ravines. The fighting became personal, faces visible, breaths heard, shouts cut short. Reed rounded a bend in the terrain and froze. A Japanese soldier stood only yards away, equally stunned. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the moment passed. The sound of gunfire swallowed everything. Far below the surface, Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka limped through a tunnel lit by flickering lanterns. Blood soaked his sleeve from a shrapnel wound, but he refused treatment. His command post was shrinking, positions lost, men gone. Reports arrived in fragments. Enemy artillery adjusted again. Another bunker silenced. Tanaka clenched his jaw. Every defense plan unraveled faster than it should have. It was as if the Americans were reading his thoughts. Intercepted radio traffic offered no answers. The strange language continued, unchanged, unbroken. They speak freely, Tanaka muttered. Because they know we cannot hear them. By the third week, the island belonged to the dead more than the living. American forces advanced relentlessly. Flamethrowers were used to clear tunnels. Grenades rolled into darkness. The ground shook with each explosion. Reed moved like a machine now, fear buried beneath exhaustion. He barely recognized his own voice when he shouted commands. During a brief lull, he slumped beside Yazzie behind a shattered rock formation. "Ben, when this is over," Reed said, breathing hard, "do you think anyone back home will know what you did?" Yazzie kept his eyes on the radio. "Maybe someday," he said. "Maybe not." The final Japanese positions collapsed under overwhelming force. Cut off, surrounded, out of options, Tanaka gathered the few remaining men. There would be no escape. He wrote his last report carefully, each character deliberate. Duty, honor, failure. When the Americans overran the bunker hours later, Tanaka lay still, his sword beside him, his war ended in silence. The guns slowly fell quiet. Smoke drifted upward, thinning as the wind carried it out to sea. Medics moved among the wounded. Graves were dug. Names were spoken softly, some for the last time. Yazzie removed his headset and set it gently on the ground. For the first time in weeks, there was nothing to transmit. Reed stood beside him, staring at the ruined island. "Hard to believe it's over," he said. Yazzie nodded. "The fighting stops," he replied. "But it doesn't really end. The war would continue across the Pacific. More islands. More names carved into memory." When peace finally came, the Navajo Code Talkers returned home without ceremony. Their mission remained classified. Their voices, once punished in classrooms, had helped guide armies and save countless lives. No enemy ever broke their code. Years later, long after the echoes of battle faded, the truth emerged. That victory had not only been forged with steel and fire, but with language, culture, and unbreakable trust. War measures courage in many ways. Years passed. The war ended not with a single moment, but with a long exhale from a world that had been holding its breath for too long. Cities lay in ruins, oceans still carried wreckage, and memories followed the men home more closely than any enemy ever had. Thomas Reed returned to Iowa with a sea bag and a silence he couldn't explain. Fireworks on the 4th of July made his shoulders tense. Sudden noises pulled him back to beaches that no longer existed on maps but were carved permanently into his mind. At night, he sometimes heard the surf and the distant thud of guns, even though cornfields stretched for miles outside his window. He rarely spoke about the island. When people asked what it was like, he simply said, "Loud," and changed the subject. Ben Yazzie went home to the desert. The red earth, the open sky, the wind moving through dry grass, it welcomed him without questions. Elders listened quietly when he spoke in fragments about the war, careful not to cross the line of secrecy he had sworn to keep. His language, the same one that had guided thousands of men through fire, returned to its oldest purpose: stories, prayers, and memory. For years, no one outside a small circle knew what the Code Talkers had done. There were no medals at first. No headlines. No parades. History moved on, as it always does. Across the ocean, families in Japan rebuilt from ash and loss. Mothers waited for sons who would never return. Survivors spoke in hushed voices about islands where entire units vanished, where the enemy seemed to strike with impossible foresight. Some blamed fate. Some blamed commanders. Few ever understood what had truly tipped the balance. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka's name survived only in family records, written carefully in ink that faded with time. To his descendants, he was a man who fulfilled his duty and never came home. The reasons no longer mattered, only the absence did. Decades later, the silence finally lifted. When the truth about the Navajo Code Talkers became public, it stunned the world. Linguists marveled. Historians rewrote chapters. Veterans who had fought beside them finally understood how orders arrived so fast, how help came just in time. At a small ceremony, Reed stood among aging Marines, his hair gray, his posture stiff. He watched as Yazzie, older now but still steady, received recognition long overdue. Their eyes met briefly. No words were needed. The war had taken much from them. Youth, innocence, friends whose names were etched into stone. But it had also revealed something enduring. That courage does not always roar. That power does not always come from machines or weapons. That sometimes, the fate of thousands rests on voices trusted, cultures respected, and words carried. Through chaos without breaking, war leaves scars that never fully fade. It reshapes nations and lives, often without mercy. But within its darkness, there are moments that remind us what humanity is capable of, when people stand together, speak for one another, and carry hope through fire. In the quiet years that followed, the world changed in ways none of them could have imagined while crouching in the sand and smoke of war. New generations grew up knowing World War II is a chapter in books, a black and white memory on screens, something safely distant. For those who had lived it, distance never truly came. Thomas Reed grew old surrounded by grandchildren who begged for stories. Sometimes he told them about farm life before the war, about baseball games and long summer evenings. Other times, when the house was quiet and the memories pressed too hard, he spoke about brotherhood, about men who carried one another when legs failed, about trust forged under fire. He never spoke of killing. He spoke of survival. Ben Yazzie became an elder in his community. Children gathered as he spoke in Navajo, his voice steady, deliberate, the same voice that once guided entire divisions through chaos. He told them that their language was alive, powerful, and sacred. That it had once helped change the course of history, not through violence but through understanding. When asked about the war, he always said the same thing. We used our words to protect lives. Across oceans and generations, echoes of the conflict lingered. Old battlefields became quiet again, reclaimed by grass and wind. Visitors walked where soldiers once ran, reading plaques, standing in silence, trying to imagine fear that could no longer be felt. Somewhere, in a museum or an archive, recordings of the Navajo language played softly, no longer secret, no longer hidden. What had once been a weapon became a lesson. That cultures carry strength. That identity matters. That respect can change outcomes. War, for all its destruction, revealed these truths the hardest way possible. And so the story does not end with victory or defeat, but with remembrance. With the understanding that every message sent, every order followed, every life lost or saved, came at a cost that can never fully be repaid. The past cannot be rewritten, but it can be honored. By listening, by remembering, by choosing, whenever possible, to let words build bridges instead of battlefields. Because long after the guns fall silent, it is the voices, spoken, preserved, and passed on, that continue to shape the world. Time thinned the ranks. One by one, the men who had stood on that distant island faded into memory, leaving behind photographs, folded flags, and stories carried by others. Chairs at reunions sat empty. Voices once loud with laughter grew quiet, then disappeared altogether. Yet the legacy endured. Teachers spoke of the war not only in terms of battles and borders, but of people, young men pulled from ordinary lives and placed into extraordinary circumstances. Students learned that victory had not come from strength alone, but from cooperation, adaptation, and trust across cultures. Among them were lessons about words. How a language nearly erased had once protected thousands of lives. How voices dismissed or silenced had become essential. How identity, when honored instead of suppressed, could become a shield stronger than steel. In the desert, wind continued to move across the land just as it always had. It carried echoes of stories told beside fires, of prayers spoken softly, of words that had traveled across oceans through crackling radios and returned home unchanged. In quiet moments, when the world slowed enough to listen, those echoes could still be felt, not as commands or codes, but as reminders. That war shows humanity at its worst, but also reveals its deepest resilience. That sacrifice is not measured only by those who fall, but by those who carry memory forward. That peace is fragile, and must be guarded with the same care once given to battle plans. The men who fought did not ask to become symbols. They were sons, brothers, friends. What they left behind was not glory, but responsibility, the responsibility to remember why such sacrifices were made. And so the story lives on, not in gunfire or explosions, but in quiet understanding. That the true cost of war is paid long after the fighting ends. That courage often speaks softly. And that sometimes, the most powerful force in history is a voice that refuses to be forgotten. In the final stretch of memory, what remained was not the noise, but the quiet clarity that followed it. Those who studied the war years later often searched for a single decisive moment, one battle, one order, one invention that tipped the balance. But for the men who lived it, history never felt that clean. It was made of countless small moments stitched together by fear, resolve, and trust. A hand reaching back into the surf to pull another man forward. A voice over the radio, calm when everything else was chaos. A decision made in seconds that saved lives no history book could ever count. The Navajo words that once crossed oceans through static now lived openly, spoken in classrooms, ceremonies, and family homes. What had been hidden for survival became visible for understanding. Not as a secret weapon, but as proof of what happens when a people's identity is finally respected. Thomas Reed passed away on a quiet morning, long after the war had faded from headlines. At his funeral, a folded flag rested on the casket. His grandchildren knew he had been a Marine. Only later did they learn what that truly meant. Ben Yazzie lived long enough to see his story told. Not exaggerated, not glorified, simply acknowledged. When asked once what he wanted people to remember, he thought for a long time before answering. That we did our duty, he said. And we came home carrying it. The world moves forward. It always does. New conflicts rise, new generations stand at crossroads, believing their moment is unlike any before it. Yet the echoes remain, quietly offering a warning and a lesson. That war demands everything and gives back very little. That courage is often ordinary people doing what must be done. And that the strongest messages are not always the loudest, but the ones that endure. In the end, the story is not about an island, or a battle, or even a war. It is about voices trusted in the darkest hours. About cultures that survived when they were needed most. And about the responsibility carried by those who remember, to choose understanding over silence, and peace over forgetting.